probably know this horrific image. If you didn't know who those people were, you wouldn't say it's horrific. You'd say two middle-aged women meeting a grandpa. And you can't quite tell what that flag is, can you? Again, if you didn't know anyone in it, there's not much to say. You might find it a little bit odd about how that woman on the right is holding the man's hand, but that's just a weird quirk, maybe. Of course, the picture changes totally when you realize that the man in the center is Mahmoud Abbas, a senior Palestinian terrorist with the PLO terrorist organization, that he is a dictator over the West Bank, that he maintains a pay-for-slay policy where he literally gives Palestinian families a government pension, huge monthly payments if their family members commit a terrorist attack on a Jew. Abbas has been a terrorist leader for more than 50 years. He was a financier of the 1972 terrorist attack on the Olympics in Munich. That's in Germany, when they had the Olympics that year, and where the Israeli team was butchered in a horrific massacre. He literally has a university degree in Holocaust denial. That was his field of study. He's an expert in it. It's so gross, but what's extra gross is when you learn that the woman on the left is Melanie Joly, Canada's foreign minister, and that this meeting was actually after the Palestinian terror attack on southern Israel in October of 2023, where over 1,000 people were killed and more than 200 hostages were taken, including women and children and even babies. Imagine meeting him and smiling with him in a selfie. The woman on the right isn't a minister with anything to do with foreign affairs or the Middle East or war or anything. She is a minister. She's Trudeau's minister for drug legalization, but her name is Ya'ara Sachs, which you might tell is a Jewish name, and that is the sole reason she's in that picture. Ya'ara Sachs was brought along on Melanie Joly's trip to meet this anti-Semitic terrorist as a kind of human excuse, like a human shield almost, as in the Liberals knew it would be a disastrous look for our foreign minister to actually meet with a terrorist, let alone just months after that terrorist massacre of Jews. But if a Jewish MP could be convinced to come along and be in the picture too, smiling, like I say, a political shield. No one could say that Melanie Joly and Justin Trudeau were Jew-hating terrorist supporters, even though they were meeting with a Jew-hating terrorist, because after all, there's a Jew right there smiling and holding the terrorist hand. So she said it was okay. It's like this Jewish MP was asserting that it was kosher or something. Surely, if she was there, Melanie Joly could be there too. Can you imagine what kind of a Jew would accept that assignment? Well, a self-hating, Canada-hating, Israel-hating Jew like Ya'ara Sachs. She's sick in the head with self-loathing. She's the kind of Jew that Justin Trudeau likes. I don't know if you've seen this story. Here she is in the Times of Israel a few years ago, saying that Israel is, quote, deeply racist towards its minorities. What an atrocious lie, but you can see why Trudeau likes her and uses her, and you can see why Mahmoud Abbas likes her too. You know, we had a whole campaign against Ya'ara Sachs after she did this. We sent our billboard truck around her riding. We mailed this postcard to every single house in her district, showing her atrocious meeting with a murderer. And I went to a local shopping center in her district, and I did some streeters about it. You take a look at a couple of them. Why do you think she would meet with him?
I think that she has disowned her own people, and I think she's looking for political gains. And it's unfortunate because her parents are part of the community, her brother's part of the community, and she really let us down.
Our grandparents lived through it and came here, fled these countries that we were persecuted. And here we are, one of us that's doing this and backstabbing us right in front of our face.
I don't know, man. I don't like what's going on in the world now. It's backwards.
What do you think of her meeting with Mahmoud Abbas? He's a terrorist leader.
Yeah. Are we surprised about anything anymore?
I've been tweeting that grotesque photo back at Ya'ara Sachs ever since she agreed to bless a murderer for Trudeau's benefit. She blocked me on Twitter, but I went to court, and the court ordered her not to block me for the rest of her career. Isn't that something? I've sometimes put questions to her on Twitter like, why haven't you asked your new friend, Mahmoud Abbas, to stop the terrorist attacks? I mean, what else is there really to talk about with a terrorist other than how to get him to stop being a terrorist? Well, I have news today. We did an access to information request to the Foreign Affairs Department called Global Affairs Canada. And we've received 86 pages back from them. Now, most of those pages are blacked out for reasons of national security or diplomacy or what the exemptions are. But there's enough in there to learn a lot about the government and how they thought of their meeting with Abbas. Look at the very first page in their document release. It's an email dated April of 2024. That's just months after the terrorist attack. Here's the unredacted part. And the word MENA, or M-I-N-A, is their acronym for the Minister of International Affairs. So MENA means Melanie Joly. Let me read. Summary. Minister visited the West Bank on March 12th, 2024. During her trip, she met with Foreign Minister Malki, President Abbas, and Canadian General Teller, with a community affected by settler violence, participated in a humanitarian roundtable with international organizations, and met with Ramallah staff. The minister reiterated Canada's support for the Palestinian people and highlighted Canada's resumed funding to the UN Relief Works Agency. Not a word about the terrorist attack. In fact, the only violent people discussed are what they call Jewish settlers, Jews who live in the West Bank, the ancient area of Judea and Samaria. No talk about Hamas or other Palestinian terrorist groups, but Canada is bragging about giving more money to the UN Relief Works Agency, UNRWA, which is a Hamas front. I did a word search in this document. I searched for the word terrorism in this entire 86-page document, and it appears only once. That's quite a feat. I'll just reread that line on page 5. West Bank and East Jerusalem. Since October, violence has increased in the West Bank and East Jerusalem as a result of Israeli military operations and terrorism by extremist settlers against Palestinians and their properties. Following repeated calls to hold violent extremist settlers accountable, several countries have announced sanctions against violent settlers, including the US and the UK. Nowhere in this document do they say what happened in October. That's the only way they talk about it, October. They just say October. They describe what Israeli Jews are allegedly doing. They describe that as terrorism, and the only people they call extremists and violent are the Jews. Isn't that weird? In 86 pages. I want you to see it for yourself. I've taken this whole 86-page document, and I've put it on a website called The Sachs Files, named after Yara Sachs because it's her disgrace. The Sachs Files, S-A-K-S. You can see it there for yourself. Go ahead and read it. I want to go through it a little bit, but feel free to go through it yourself for more. On page 2, you can see most of it's redacted, but they did say this about the meeting with Abbas, the terrorist leader. They said, both meetings with Minister Malki and President Abbas were pleasant and friendly in tone. The meetings were supposed to consist of a 10-minute one-on-one portion, followed by a joint formal seating. However, both meetings were significantly longer than planned, especially the one-on-one portions. So they're literally treating a terrorist more warmly than, say, they treat the Premier of Alberta or Saskatchewan. They got along great, guys. So they went on much longer, but not long enough for a word about stopping terrorism. Not a word. The only terrorism they talk about is what they call Jewish terrorism. Can you believe it? Seriously, looking at these notes, you'd think the world's worst terrorists were the Jews, and the victims of terrorism were Palestinians. This was an itinerary scheduled by the Canadian government, although it is indistinguishable from what the PLO would or Hamas would schedule if they were in control, which I guess they sort of are. Look here on page 3. It says, community visit to community affected by settler violence. The minister visited the village of Al-Mazra al-Kibilia and the surrounding area in the West Bank with a representative of the West Bank Protection Consortium, an initiative aimed at humanitarian protection and strengthening development conditions of Palestinians from the West Bank. She was also briefed by 2 NGOs, Première Urgence International and Norwegian Refugee Council, on settler violence and forcible transfer trends. Page 5 is the worst, though, in a way. It's the official biography of Mahmoud Abbas given to Melanie Joly and Yara Sachs. I told you about his role in financing the murder of Jews at the 1972 Olympics in Munich. I told you about his pay for slay, how he gives pensions to families of terrorists. I told you about his PhD in anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. Here's how the Canadian Global Affairs staff described him in their short-form biography and briefing notes for the cabinet ministers. I'll read this in full. This is all they think Melanie Joly and Ya'ara Sachs need to know. This is it. Let me read it to you. President of the Palestinian Authority since 2005. Following his election, he called on all Palestinian factions to end the use of arms against Israel in favor of peaceful resistance, to which he has remained committed. Chairman of the PLO Executive Committee since 2004, following the death of Yasser Arafat. Said to have had a powerful behind-the-scenes influence on the PLO. He initiated dialogue with Jewish and pacifist movements as early as the 1970s. He is credited with persuading the PLO to recognize Israel in the 1980s. Headed the Palestinian negotiating team to the secret Oslo talks and signed the Declaration of Principles in 1993 on behalf of the PLO. He was also the head of the PLO Negotiation Affairs Department between 1994 and 2003, head of the Central Election Commission between 1996 and 2002, and Secretary General of the PLO Executive Committee from 1996 to 2004. Married and has 3 sons, 1 deceased. He obtained a PhD in history from the People's Friendship University of Russia. He was born in 1935 in Safad, now Israel. His son Yasser is a Canadian citizen. He speaks Arabic. While he understands some English, he will conduct official meetings in Arabic. That's all they have to say about him. I love how they say he was elected. It's true. He had 1 election and then no more elections needed 20 years later. They try to portray him as a friend to the Jews and a friend of peace, don't you know? Not a word about his murders or terrorism, not a word about his pay for slay. They said he has a history degree, and yeah, I suppose that's true. I wonder why they don't say it was a history of Holocaust denial, as in his revisionist history in denying the Holocaust. That's odd to omit that, don't you think? I don't think anybody knew his son was a Canadian citizen. That's super gross. I wonder if his son is a terrorist like his dad, or maybe raises money for terrorism in Canada. But then again, there's no need to, given that Canada happily gives tens of millions of dollars to the UNRWA. I tell you, the weirdest thing about this memo is how they just will not say what happened on October 7th, 2023. I mean, look at this on page 5 of the document. Since October, many Palestinians working in Israel had their work permits revoked, causing a 33% loss in West Bank income. Yeah, gee whiz. I wonder why Israelis stopped giving work permits to Palestinians from the territories. I wonder if it has anything to do with whatever happened on that mysterious day in October. Now, pages 7 and 8, the diplomats and the bureaucrats of global affairs have prepared some talking points, that is, things for Melanie Joly and Ya'ara Sachs to say while meeting with this terrorist. I won't read it all, but just look at the subject topics. Humanitarian crisis, ceasefire, West Bank. Now, these are all framed as criticisms of the Jews, things the Jews are doing wrong, and praise for the PLO. The next one, Palestinian Authority reforms, would be interesting, but it's blanked out. Palestinian statehood, they support it. The UNRWA, the UNRWA, that's basically the money laundering. Canada gives taxpayers money to UNRWA, which passes it on to Hamas, tens of millions of dollars. Arms exports to Israel. You'd think Israel was the terrorist enemy here. It turns out Canada hasn't sold a weapon to Israel in 30 years. I don't know if we sort of make any modern weapons anymore. I just got to read this one line to you, though. This is fueling the risk of an escalation of the conflict, particularly as we are entering the holy month of Ramadan. I don't quite understand what they're saying. Are they saying that in Ramadan of the Muslim calendar that there is more likely to be violence? I don't know what they're saying there. A lot of pages just show back and forth emails amongst staff, but one email stands out. On page 30, you can see how excited Trudeau is about meeting this terrorist with a Jewish MP to provide cover for such an abomination. Look at this one line. Good morning. Bumping this in inboxes as PCO has flagged to us that PMO is eagerly standing by. Thank you, Jeremy. That's from Jeremy Harley. He, him, il. So PCO stands for Privy Council Office. PMO is Prime Minister's Office. Trudeau was really excited about showing that he stands with the terrorists. On page 41, there's talk about the Prime Minister's office being worried about a red line. What red line would that be? We'll share the updated version with Privy Council for approval and with Desk to ensure there are no red lines. I don't know what that means. Does that mean something that can't be crossed? If so, what's a red line for Trudeau? Mentioning the victims of Palestinian terrorism, mentioning what happened on October 7th? I think it could be that. Because you know what? I did a word search of this entire document, and the word hostages only appears in one place, in 86 pages. It appears in the public tweets that the government did after this visit. On page 52, you can see that the Trudeau Liberals claimed to have raised the Israeli hostages taken by Hamas back to Gaza. But actually, the word hostages appears nowhere in their internal documents, certainly not on their agenda for their meeting with the terrorist Abbas. It was a lie. Of course, they didn't talk about hostages. They probably called those hostages violent settlers. It's probably what they called those Bibas kids, the young children who were murdered by Hamas. As you know, the terrorists on October 7th weren't just Hamas members. Hundreds of ordinary Gaza citizens streamed across into Israel too, committed murders and rapes. And the hostages they took back to Gaza were raped too, both the men and the women. But none of that was on the agenda of any of these meetings with Abbas or the other Palestinians. In fact, the opposite. Canada accused Israel of rape. Seriously, again, I did a word search, and the only hit for the word sexual assault were 2 social media posts saying this: "We believe Palestinian women. Allegations on sexual and gender-based violence against them must be investigated, and Palestinian women must be supported. Today, Minister Jolie announced in the West Bank that Canada will commit $1 million to support this important work." What? Hundreds of young Israeli women and girls were murdered, kidnapped, and they were raped. Some of them were murdered and raped after being murdered. It was all live streamed by the Palestinian terrorists. It was horrific, Nazi-style rape and murder spree and torture. Not a word about that. The opposite, the Jews were accused of rape. The Canadian government flew to the region and accused the Jews of doing what Hamas had done to the Jews. If you read through the 86 pages, you'll see that probably 100 names of different diplomats and bureaucrats were working on this visit. The messaging, the briefing notes, the itinerary, not one of them called Hamas or the PLO terrorists, not one. Not one of them thought that October 7th was the crime. It was barely mentioned. It was an afterthought. October. They don't say what happened. Israel's reaction to October was the crime. Israel was the aggressor. Israel was the violent one. Israel was the terrorist one. 86 pages, the only reference to that word is to call Israelis terrorists. October 7th was about murder and rape, but Canada accused only Israel of rape. I think Global Affairs Canada is as anti-Semitic as Hamas itself. There's no difference in tone or blame or factual lies. How can you do a biography of the arch-terrorist Mahmoud Abbas and not mention any of that? Not mention his role as a killer, not mention his expertise in anti-Semitic Holocaust denial. How can you claim he's elected when he's in fact a dictator? And how can you ignore what he's doing right now with his pay-for-slay scheme? I have a theory, if I'm being generous. I think Melanie Jolie is actually sort of stupid. I'm not saying that as an insult. I think she is just sort of dumb as a person. I think she was appointed to cabinet because she's pretty and she meets the demographics that Trudeau was after in 2015.
Your cabinet, you said, looks a lot like Canada. And I understand one of the priorities for you was to have a cabinet that was gender balanced. Why was that so important to you?
Because it's 2015. Canadians elected extraordinary members of parliament from across the country.
I think she knows nothing about 200 foreign countries, but she was appointed to foreign affairs anyways. I think it's actually possible that she's so dumb, that she just reads her briefing notes and is too uninformed and unintelligent and uncritical to be skeptical of them. And if 100 Global Affairs Canada bureaucrats and diplomats and other staff tell her that the only terrorists are the Jews and the only victims are the Palestinians, it's not like she knows anything about history or geography on her own. She just might be that dumb. Smart enough to see that Hamas thugs rule the streets in Canada, including in riots in her own city of Montreal. So she's smart enough to know that she doesn't want to get on the wrong side of Hamas. She knows that Hamas has the votes and the energy in Canada, better not to upset them. And if all the experts, including scholars and PhDs working for the Canadian government, if they all tell her how evil Israel is, maybe she's not that stupid to go along with them. If all the smart people are saying that, if every single one of your staff are saying that Israel are the terrorists and Hamas are the victims, maybe you just go along with it if you want to get ahead in the Trudeau government. That's a possible excuse for her. It's possible. But what about Ya'ara Sachs? She's a double citizen in Israel and Canada. She's Jewish. She's someone who claims to care about anti-Semitism and terrorism. So what's her excuse? Why did she sit there in the meeting with Abbas and not ask a single question about terrorism, about anti-Semitism, about pay for slay, about the victims of the Munich Olympics? Why has she not asked him since then to release the hostages? They spent a lot of time together, very pleasantly. Why hasn't she phoned him up and said to release the hostages? Why has she done only one thing? Posing for a selfie with that murderer, thereby giving him moral credibility, giving him the moral approval as a Jew. Melanie Joly is the worst foreign minister Canada has had in memory. She's stupid as a plank. No one important listens to her. She's sort of a joke. We all know that. But for Ya'ara Sachs to participate in this orgy of anti-Semitism, well, that's something we haven't seen on this scale since the Holocaust itself, when some Jewish capos, as they were called, actually became turncoats and ran errands for the Nazis in the ghettos, in the concentration camps, sometimes actually selecting the Jews who would die, doing that errand for the Nazis. Now, Ya'ara Sachs obviously did not select the Jews who would die on October 7th. I won't go that far. But she smiled and held a murderer's hand and participated in a massive moral cover-up of his anti-Semitic violence. She was the linchpin, in a way. The Melanie Joly visit to Mahmoud Abbas was a major Canadian operation that would have shocked the world as Canada officially endorsing a terrorist entity, which it was. But with Ya'ara Sachs offering to give the whole thing her blessing, offering to sit there and smile and hold his hand while they all talked about those violent terrorist, rapist Israelis, she whitewashed this whole sordid affair. I want you to read the documents for yourself at thesaksfiles.com, S-A-K-S, and realize just how anti-Semitic Canada's Foreign Affairs Department has become, just how stupid and immoral Melanie Joly is, and what a disgrace to her community and to her family that Trudeau Jew Ya'ara Sachs is.